Tyrian, Myrcella firmly believed that. When she went to him, he had a dusty old book of some sort in his lap, and when she lifted it and closed it, she saw that the cover was so worn that the title had rubbed away. "Surely there is something else you ought to be doing," she said, pointedly leaning across him to blow out the lamp on the far side of his bed. He smiled shamelessly, likely aware that she would never truly scold him. Even when he was unruly or rude, she could never bring herself to speak harshly to him, knowing as she did just how unkind their lady mother could be when she wanted. "I cannot sleep, Selah," he said, rising up onto his knees when she sat on the bed. "I keep thinking of what Joff must have done to Lady Sansa. Did she seem hurt, Selah?" "No, Tom, she didn't," Myrcella assured him, gently guiding him to lie down against the pillows, and then settling alongside him, but over the covers, for their lady mother would surely rage if she thought Myrcella had spent the night with Tommen again. It was only that Tommen had such trouble sleeping in strange beds, and the whole journey to and from Winterfell had been difficult for him, especially, she thought, since he had gotten along so well with Bran Stark, only to have that rare chance for friendship so brutally swept away. Shaken and scared, but not hurt. She didn't know what precisely Joff had done to Lady Sansa, and did not think that she would find out. She had gone to Lady Sansa's room after all the hubbub had subsided, and plain little Jane had turned her away, saying that Lady Sansa is unwell. Joff would never admit to any wrongdoing, of course, and even if he did, their lady mother would cover it all up so no one would ever find the truth of things. All she could tell was that Joff likely hadn't struck Lady Sansa, and he hadn't raped her. That, at least, was a mercy, after the mess he'd created by propositioning her during their stay at Winterfell. "Do you think," Selah Tommen said, looking far too fearful for a boy of 10, "that I might be allowed to come and stay with you at Winterfell when Joff becomes king?" "Oh, sweeterling," Myrcella sighed, smoothing his lovely, soft hair away from his face and smiling as warmly as she could. "You will always be welcome with me, never doubt that." She'd rather die than see Joff welcomed into her home as king, but it would not do to say such a thing aloud. Who knew who might be listening, after all? Sir Aris had always warned her of that, even more sternly than her mother. "You realize," she said, settling beside Joff at table the next morning, "that every time you insult or attack Lady Sansa, you push the Starks further from loyalty." He scoffed, biting into a Highgarden peach, brought by Renly, in a basket wound with the golden hair ribbons Margaery favored, and watching the juice trickle over his fingers. He was so painfully arrogant sometimes that it made her want to tear at her hair, but there was no reasoning with him. She could only wait. "That bitch is ripe for the plucking," he said, looking at her sidelong, as if forgetting that she was not one of his many transitory cronies. "If that savage of hers hasn't fucked her already, I guarantee I'll have her maidenhead before the year is out. She wants it, she's just afraid of what her fool father will say." Myrcella laughed at that, so long and so hard that even Uncle Jaime's arrival did not hold her. "What jape has my least favorite nephew shared to make you laugh so, niece?" he said, pouring himself a cup of ale and taking the place directly opposite Joff. "Something vulgar and ugly, I presume." "What would a white cloak know of vulgarity?" Joff asked, snickering as if he'd made the wittiest jest in the world. Myrcella rolled her eyes, her own laughter dying a short death, and turned to Uncle Jaime, who was ignoring Joff with an expression of polite, razor-sharp curiosity on his face. "Joffrey is of the opinion that Lady Sansa and her betrothed are rather closer than is proper," she said, "and even if they are not, he believes that he will have her for a mistress by the end of the year." There was a heartbeat of silence, and then laughter ripped from Jaime like a roar. Joff stormed away, crimson-faced and fuming, but hopefully diminished. Let him remain so he might leave her alone. Myrcella did not think it likely, but she had to pray for it regardless. Once Joff had set his sights on Lady Sansa, he had decided to lay claim to her, and there would be no dissuading him until she was removed from his company. There was naught else Myrcella could do but pray. Chapter 13, Quentyn. Chapter text. Here, at least, Quentyn did not come up short. "If you do one another harm," Maester Kedry called from under his canopy by the mast, "you will sew up your own wounds." "Your concern does you credit," Maester Cletus laughed, sun flashing off his bright sword and white teeth. "His Highness and I are as brothers, though, we will do no harm, I promise you." Quint said nothing, choosing instead to watch Cletus, a little pleased to notice that his friend had still not learned to lower his shield when fighting a man of Quint's lesser height. Your silence on the matter gives me little comfort, Quint Cletus teased, stepping left, starting to circle. Quint remained calm, used to Cletus' japes and jesting, and chose instead to watch Cletus' footwork. It was smooth, steady, and as perfect as ever, even with the gentle sway of the ship beneath him. Quentin did not have even half Cletus' natural grace, but he had the sea legs of House Nymerus Martell, and had taken to sailing and seafaring with greater ease than he had anything else in his life. His mother had once told him that her mother's family, Volanten nobles, had been seafarers, smugglers, once, turned princes of trade but not princes in truth, because none who did not have pure Valyrian blood were considered such in Volantis, and so he supposed it was in his blood twice over, as nothing else was. Perhaps that was why this alone seemed to fit him, when nothing else ever had. Cletus' sword snapped up, and Quint caught it easily on his shield, a testing blow, without any real speed or strength behind it. Perhaps you should meet the queen without a shirt, cousin Nym called from her place beside Kedry, and Quint did not need to look to know she was grinning her best, sharpest viper's smile. It might distract her so much you need not flirt. He did not look, but he did flush with embarrassment. It was simply too hot to spar in armor, and even their padded gamisons left them all over hot and incapable of proper fighting. Kedry was not wrong in being concerned that they would hurt one another, although he perhaps should have been more concerned with Jerris and Arch, already hammering at one another just on the far side of the mast, taking advantage of the spacious deck. Did Nym mean it, though? Quint had never thought himself much to look upon, not with Cletus and Jerris for comparison, but he supposed his arms and chest were fine enough, well muscled from so many years of hard work in the yard, and his stomach was flat, his hips narrow. He only just caught Cletus' second blow, this one with his own sword, and scowled to hear Nym laughing, a ruse, then. He wondered for a moment if she and Cletus were sharing a bed, for it was unlike Nym to show even the slightest favor without good cause, and then forgot to wonder when Cletus spun and came at him again, fast and vicious and with his shield just a little too high. I still do not know what to do with our visitors, Quint said, later on, when it was him and Nymeria alone over the Sivas board. The lady at least I am sure of. Sure only that she is who she claims, Nym pointed out, sweeping two of his elephants aside with a well-placed tray bucket hit. Not sure that anything else she says is true. Do not be swayed by your pity, Quentin, she is beautiful, and sorrowful, but she is dangerous. My father would not remember her so fondly otherwise. That was true, Quint had to admit, while his own father found many people who might be considered boring to be worth great esteem, his uncle was easily bored, and needed companions of a similarly reckless bent. It was a major cause of strife between the sons of Lorza Martell, and would surely always be so. And I would doubt even her identity, if not for the fact that I remember the lady below decks in her previous life. She was our aunt's closest companion, aside from my father. Quint was surprised by that. Nym spoke of their aunt as rarely as their fathers did, even though she was doubtless the one with the best recollection of her. Obera had yet been at Old Town when their aunt died, Tyen yet in the mother house, Sarala yet in her mother's belly. Nymeria had been there, though, clinging to Oberyn's fingertips and watching, with those same wide, dark eyes Quentin found himself arrested by just now. And she is so unchanged that you do not doubt her. She is, Nym said, toying with her butter knife, thoughtful and concerned. Which is a concern all on its own, I suppose, but we have other concerns which weigh more heavily on me just now. I wish I could write to my father, or even to yours, and ask their advice. He was as stunned as if Cletus had knocked him overboard. Nym was never so uncertain and unsure that she admitted to needing advice. Hells, she was usually the one teasing everyone else for being less than absolutely confident. We are sailing into unknown waters, little cousin, she said, in this and in 1,000 other things. We must be as careful as your father, and as brave as mine. Quentin thought his own father a tremendously brave man, for facing his courtiers and bannermen every day despite knowing how they laughed behind their hands at his infirmity, but he did not say so aloud. Nym was melancholy in a way he had never seen before, and it seemed wisest to bite his tongue just for now. He knocked aside one of her dragons, and she cursed in brilliant Volanten. That, at least, was more usual. You fight well, cousin. Quentin lowered the waterskin, wary now, and watching. The man who would picking was shackled in the shade, not far from where Kedry and Nym were poring over their maps. Volantis was next on the horizon, where they would dock and gather supplies and perhaps seek out NYM's mother, who was sister to a triarch and might be of use to them. NYM had not seen her mother in over 20 years, and seemed uncertain as to what sort of reception she might expect, but determined to seek it out nonetheless. "I am capable with a blade," he said, wondering now if it had been wise to practice their swordsmanship in sight of such an uncertain companion. Too late to wonder, really, but he did so all the same. "Such things are necessary. I have not had the chance to practice since we met," cousin Egon in name said, beseeching and charming and 1,000 other things Quint would never be. "Might I be allowed?" "No," Quentin said. "No, I am afraid not. Perhaps another time." He scrubbed the linen one of his attendants handed him through his hair and over his neck and chest, rubbing away the worst of the sweat. They would be in Volantis the day after next, and when there, he could bathe properly, but for now he had to make do with scant water rations and copious layers of scent, and taking a moment, with his face hidden, to consider his next words. "I wish things could be different," he said, accepting a loose linen shirt with a smile of thanks. "But you must understand why they are not." "Your doubt and suspicion do you credit," Egon said, dipping his head in what seemed to be admiration. "And yet, much and all as I admire it, I still resent it. I wish for us to become friends, cousin." "And we may, in time," Quint said, shrugging into the long jacket of plain red silk his attendants held out behind him. "But for now, we must be cautious. Were our roles reversed, doubtless you would do the same." Conington, sitting just behind Egon, snorted in obvious annoyance, but the lady trilled a laugh, sitting beyond Conington with her face almost hidden in shadow. "My dear Prince Quentin," she said, "were our roles reversed, there would be no need for caution." Quint watched her, the sliver of tired face visible to him, and wondered if perhaps he and NYM had been wrong to consider her their best chance of an ally among the Maybe Prince's company. It seemed, in flashes and starts, that she was more dangerous than Conington or the big knight in the hold could ever be. Chapter 14, Arya. Chapter text. The howling of the wolves was what woke her, Shaggy and Bran's wolf, piercing the quiet of the night, driving them all from their beds. Bran's wolf. Bran's room. She ran, not caring that mother would scold her for being about the castle in just her nightgown and bed stockings, but Nymeria was at her heels, so no one would dare impede her. Nymeria joined the howling when they rounded the corner before Bran's door, and Arya stumbled to a stop, kept from falling only by Sir Roderick's suddenly outstretched arm. "Peace, girl," he said, pale-faced and older than usual, in the queer light. "Tread carefully." She tiptoed into the room, eyes always on the shifting shadows by the bed, Bran, mother, Rookon, and stopped only when she noticed what lay beyond the bed, between the wolves. "Gods be good," she said, watching Nymeria crouch by Shaggy and Bran's wolf, jumping half a foot in the air when Grey Wind glided past her to join them. It was so strange, to see the four of them without Ghost and Lady, and would have been so even without the dead man on the floor. "What happened?" Robb demanded, bare-chested and long dagger in hand. "Sir Roderick, what?" "This man was going to kill me," Bran said, stunning them all. His voice was deeper now, as if it had broken halfway in his slumber, and his eyes seemed heavy in his head, but most of all, he was awake. "Mother held the blade, and Summer killed him." Arya was already at Mother's side, taking the lengths of cloth Rookon was tearing from Bran's sheets and wrapping them carefully around Mother's beautiful, blooded hands. Robb moved to lean over the end of the bed, bracing himself near to Bran's feet. "Who is Summer?" he asked, for want of anything else. What else was there to be said, after all? Who would want to kill Bran? "Why? My wolf," Bran said, patting the bed and smiling when his wolf clambered up to lie alongside him, rumbling like a purring cat through his bloody muzzle. "It's high time I named him, don't you think?" Mother barked a sharp laugh, sudden and short, and then they all fell silent. Arya carefully tied the strips of sheet as tight as she could, wincing to hurt Mother but afraid of letting the bleeding continue unfettered. Mother's long fingers were twitching, as if damaged, and Arya could not clear the blood well enough to properly see where the cuts were, never mind where they were deepest. "Send for Maester Lewin," she said, "and send someone for my robe, and a shirt for Robb. Rookon, were you sleeping here? Get under the blankets beside Bran, stay warm." "Mother. Mother." Mother blinked, as if coming awake, and smiled thinly. "Are you warm enough, Mother?" Arya asked, keeping her eyes firmly on Mother's for fear of her going distant again. She had heard father tell tales of men going distant after suffering grave injuries in battle, and it never boded well. "Would you like a blanket?" Rob wrapped the old woven blanket from the foot of Bran's bed around Mother's shoulders without being asked. Now that the first shock had worn off, he was scowling, the sort of deep scowl that belonged more on Father's face than on Rob's, and his shoulders had gone tense. Arya supposed she would be tense, if this were the first problem she faced as Winterfell's keeper, and wished she had some pretty words to ease him. Sansa would know what to say, and would likely have stitched Mother's hands back together by now, too, but Arya would make do with what skills she had, and keep quiet. Mayor Stillowin would come quickly, and would tend to Mother, and Sir Roderick would help Rob choose his path over this mess. Arya tied a thin strip of cloth around each of Mother's wrists, just to be sure, and while she did that, Rob took a blanket from the chest behind the door and tossed it over the body, to hide it from view. Arya felt something in her back loosen when the man's face disappeared. She could not remember ever seeing a corpse before, or at least, not one so brutally slain. Sir Roderick knocked on the door frame just as Rob settled alongside Bran, behind Arya, wrapping an arm over his skinny shoulders and kissing the tangle of his hair. All five of them looked up, startled, but Mother offered another of those thin smiles. "Mayor Stillowin, my lady," Sir Roderick said, "and some men, to move the body, if you permit it." "Of course," Sir Mother said, nodding despite the tremor in her voice. "Please send Mayor Stillowin in." Mayor Stillowin hardly blinked to see Bran sitting up, awake, and instead sat beside Arya on the edge of the bed, in front of Mother. "Did you wrap these, Lady Arya?" he asked quietly, setting his case to his other side and taking Mother's hands into his lap. "Fine work indeed, I think." Arya watched what he was doing carefully, only a little aware that the boys were murmuring between themselves, and mirrored his cautious touch on Mother's other hand. The sooner they had her wounds tended the better, surely. "Lord Rukan," Mayor Stillowin said over his shoulder, not looking away from Mother's hands, "run down to the kitchens, ask Gage for a tot of Bath's small beer for your lady mother, to soothe her nerves, good lad." Rukan bounced off the bed, jostling all of them, and whistled for Shaggy to follow him as he went. They hurtled off together. Rob settled more comfortably beside Bran, and Arya kept watching Mayor Stillowin's work. It did not look so very difficult, in truth. "Now comes the difficult part," he said, and Arya felt her face grow hot. She hadn't realized that the Maester was watching her as close as she was watching him. "Mind me now, my lady, see how I go." She watched hard as he carefully uncoiled Mother's slightly clenched fingers, ignoring her hiss of discomfort, and held it to the light of the little glass-cased lantern Rob was holding out. Mother's sewing lantern. Now she looked, to examine it. The Maester said, sounding relieved. "Well, at least you will keep all your fingers, my lady. Come, Lady Arya, look here." Arya came, and looked, and saw Mother's bone shining pale in more places than one. "These sinews here," Lewin said, pointing out the stringy parts sort of visible between the meat of Mother's fingers and palm, "are still connected, and so your lady mother will still have movement in her hands if we sew her wounds properly. Would you like to help me?" "Oh, I couldn't," Arya said, retreating to her previous spot and ducking her head, to hide behind her hair. "My stitches are straight and even," Lewin said. "I have seen them, my lady, and they are precisely as they should be for work such as this. Here, this is the needle you will be using, and this the thread. Thread the needle for me, and we will decide what to do then." Arya's hands shook as she fiddled at the eye of the needle, but she managed to thread it, and passed it back to Mayor Stillowin without incident. He seemed to realize how little she wished to aid in this, and instead passed her a glass bottle, and a cloth. "Wash your lady mother's other hand with this," he said. "The cuts on that hand are not quite so deep, but I must be able to see them clearly all the same. I will stitch if you wash." Arya nodded, and carefully daubed away the blood caking and clinging to Mother's hand while the Maester went about his work. Underneath the blood, Mother's fingers were blue with cold, and Arya wished she could hold on to them to warm them, but surely that would hurt. "Are you cold, Arya?" Mother asked. "Come here, sweeterling, sit under my blanket with me." Arya had not noticed that she was shivering, but when she curled under Mother's outstretched arm, under the heavy blanket, she was surprised by just how cold she felt. "Why would anyone wish to kill Bran, Mother?" she asked, barely daring to even whisper the words. "He has never done anything that anyone should want him dead." "No, sweeterling, he has not," Mother said, the foggy distance gone from her eyes, replaced by fury. But I shall find out who sent that man, and I will make certain they pay for this, you can be sure of that. They all slept in Bran's room that night, piling onto his bed and sharing the extra blankets to keep warm, even Mother, although she remained in her chair, and Rukun abandoned the bed to curl up on the rug with Shaggy at some stage. "My legs aren't working," Bran said, when Rob moved to help him up from bed. "What am I to do? I cannot stay in bed all the time." Mother was gone to bathe and dress, and to wash her hair. She had washed it only once in the 3 weeks since Bran's fall, and Arya's stomach had dropped in sympathy when Mother's maid had come and suggested it. She could not imagine how horrible it would feel, and how much soap it would take. But Bran's legs were a more pressing issue than Mother's hair. She knew. What were they going to do? "For now," Rob said, "I will carry you down to the hall, and back up. You have the whole of Winterfell to run," Bran pointed out, looking more embarrassed than anything else, which Arya could not understand. Were she in his position, she would be raging, cursing the gods both old and new. "Perhaps no, Sir Roderick has other duties, and Rukun is not big enough." "I could," Rukun put in, bouncing on the bed as though this were a normal morning. "I could carry you if you needed me to, Bran, I could." "I don't doubt it, little brother," Bran promised him, "but I will need to be carried everywhere, unless some other solution is found, and then you would never have time for anything else." Rukun stopped bouncing, pouting in annoyance, torn, obviously, between standing by Bran and acting his age. Arya might have laughed, in other circumstances. "What are we to do, then?" she asked, tying a ribbon around the end of her braid, a plain ribbon, brown and unremarkable, but a concession to Mother, who was so angry and scared that Arya would have done a great deal more to offer her comfort than just wear a ribbon in her hair. "I cannot carry you, and as you say, Rob has duties to attend to." "Hodder could carry you, if you don't mind his company," Rob said thoughtfully. "Just until we find some better solution. Perhaps we could move you into chambers on the ground floor, too. Rukun might like to move as well, to keep you company, and it would suit the wolves better, no doubt." "Me and Shaggy will move," Rukun said firmly, beaming at Bran. "We can have chambers alongside one another. Mayor Stillowin hasn't said you can leave bed just yet, so it will be a few days before we must think too hard on this," Rob said, quiet and gentle and bizarrely like father, considering how little he had of father's look. "Perhaps in that time, we shall find a better solution." Bran smiled, as thin and pained as Mother's smiles from the night before, and Rob left them, trailed by Rukun and Shaggy and Grey Wind. Bran's smile fell as soon as the door closed. "I'll bring you books," she said, "and anything else you might want. We'll find some way of helping, Bran, I know we will." "Nothing will help," he said, turning to look out the window. "I flew, Arya, and I fell, and I shall never even stand again. You should go, attend to your own duties." "I will be fine." He would not be, she knew, but she did not want to upset him, so she left Nymeria behind her, and hoped that they could find something, anything, to help. Before Bran was even out of bed, Mother was wrapping herself in her traveling cloak. "You must be brave, my darlings," she said, touching Rob's face with one bandaged hand and Arya's face with the other. "I will be home as soon as I may, heed Mayor Stillowin, and Gage and the others." "We will," Mother Arya said, painfully aware that she was no fit replacement for their mother, not as Rob was for their father. "We will do our best to keep Winterfell standing for your return." Mother smiled once more, and then turned away, accepting Sir Roderick's help in mounting her horse. It was a long road to King's Landing, and they would be best served to leave now, early in the day, to give themselves their best start. Arya wished more than anything that they would stay, or that she could go with them. "Is it brave?" Rob asked on a whisper, "to admit that I wish she was not leaving?" Arya shook her head, linked her arm through Rob's, and turned back to the keep. It was starting to rain, after all, and there was much to be done. Chapter 15, Asher. Chapter text. "Welcome though you always are at 10 Towers, niece, I do wonder what has kept you here so long on this visit." Asher lifted her head from the book she had chosen from the reader's library, a little ashamed at having been called on what felt like cowardice. "There's madness afoot on Pike, Nuncle," she said, closing her book but keeping it in her hand, a book on dragon lore, in a time of dragons, if the rumors she had heard during her stop in Volantis were to be believed, as she rose to speak with Roderick, eye to eye. He was not a tall man, her mother's brother, and she was a tall woman, so they were matched, more or less. I worry, and wish to spy it from afar. I was too close when I docked to see my father, but from here, I think I can see the shape of it. And is that shape a black ship with a red deck? He asked, captained by a dangerous fool. The most scandalous of her father's brothers had visited the Isles for the first time in years not long before Asher's departure. The crow's eye was a fascinating man, but a terrible one, and Asher had not trusted a word from his blued lips. The reader had shared her doubts, as had no few of her friends among her father's bannermen. "What fools he thinks us," she said, looking away to hide her rage. The reader did not approve of such extremes as she sometimes felt, but that did not make her feel them any less. "Expecting us to believe that he has journeyed to Valyria of old, as though it is not known the world over that such a journey guarantees death." "Mayhaps he has been to Valyria," the reader said, surprising her. He had been more skeptical of Euron's wild claims than anyone. "But I know for certain that he has dabbled in sorcery. I have looked into him quite closely in your absence, and have heard disquieting things in response to my enquiries." "What enquiries are these?" "A reader may find friends all across the known world, niece," he said, eyes twinkling in amusement, "and am I not the reader?" "Tell me of these enquiries," Asher pressed. "Will your revelations keep the crow's eye from my father if shared with our people?" The sway Euron exercised over her father frightened Asher, particularly now that she had seen her father for herself. It seemed to her that they were in genuine danger, that he would return them all to the old way if given a weak leader to guide. A weak leader like her long-missing baby brother, for example. "He will remain at your father's side for as long as your father will have him, regardless of what the people think," the reader said, all laughter gone from his sharp eyes. "He must have a worthy opponent, an alternative more enticing than Victorian or the Damfair. Victorian would never entice anyone to anything, save his men to their deaths in battle. He was a fanatic, just as deep in lunacy as Aaron, but directed differently. Victorian believed in the old way as some men believed in gods, and was dangerous for his close-mindedness, his certainty. Aaron was something else altogether, a zealot but a peaceful man, a man not given to excess in anything save his devotion to the drowned god." His fear had sparked something in Asher's heart, a fear of her own, a fear that followed the same shape as the shadow looming over Pike. All of it came down to the crow's eye. She wondered how much of their fears Euron saw, with his bright blue eye, and with the black. "Whatever nonsense my fool brother has put in your head of being his heir, you can forget it," Gwyneth said, imperious and proud, as she poured tea into delicate cups. "I am the rightful ruler of 10 Towers, and I will have my rights." "I'm sure you think so, sister," the reader said, rolling his eyes to Asher over Gwyneth's shoulder. "But that is not for you to decide. Now pour the tea, and show Asher some affection, home." Asher smiled, accepting Gwyneth's scowling offer of tea, and glanced about. Her mother was absent again. Unsurprising, but no less worrying for it. Alanis Harlaw was absent as much from the real world as from meal times, and Asher worried constantly for her mother, in that, at least, she was not concerned for her father. He still loved his wife deeply, even if he did seem to resent Asher for reminding him of her mother's plight, and that boded well for Asher's hopes to leave herself between him and the crow's eye. "And that boy of yours," Gwyneth said, staring harder at Asher now. "He flirted with me." "How dare he? I am his host." "I think you'll find that I am his host," Sister Lord Roderick said cheerfully, sipping at his tea and smiling. Asher had gifted him with a pair of Mirish seeing glasses, found on her travels, and he wore them constantly. They made him look an owl, his eyes huge and staring behind them, but he loved them, so Asher hid her laughter. "And our niece has her crew well in hand. I am sure no harm will come to anyone as a result of their presence here." Asher knew that for a fact, because her crew knew the penalty for causing harm. There had been incidents, early in their long journey, when some of her men had tried to take women who were less than willing, or to pillage when they had stock to trade, and each infringement had cost them a finger, or an ear, or a toe. They had not been long about coming into line. "I will skin any man who harms you alive, Auntie," she said, swallowing her bitter tea. "Worry not on that front, they are good boys, so long as they continue to fear me." Gwyneth looked less pleased by that than Asher felt she ought, but it would do. Anything that quelled Gwyneth's razored tongue would do. "Your fool mother has been trouble enough, without your crew," Gwyneth grumbled, always wailing and moaning about her absent babes. "Not so absent now," Asher said, "and yet she can hardly stand to look upon my face. Are you sure that my brothers and me are the cause of her pain?" You four, and your rotten-smelling father, Gwyness hissed, fists clenched tight on the tabletop. My sister has known nothing but pain from the day she took Balon Greyjoy's name. Rotten-smelling, she had called Lord Balon. Like the stench Carl had noticed over Pike, like the greasy shadows that permeated the hole around the sea stone chair, like the shadows that infested her dreams, trailing the ghost of the silence. Carl looked surprised when Asha stormed aboard, weighed down by a case of books from her uncle's library and more worries than she had borne in a long while. My mother is losing her mind, she said, and my father is not far behind her. My uncles are at war, and the winner is plain from here. What kind of isles will we have if Euron rises to the throne? Carl spat over the side of the ship, quiet as he so rarely was, and turned to look her in the eye after a long, thoughtful silence. Not the sort of isles for the likes of us, I think, he said. What heading, Captain? I think, Asha said, that we ought seek out the Damfair, and seek his counsel. 2 uncles who see beyond these islands of ours have I, and I would have wisdom from each of them. Great WYK, then Carl said, offering her half a bow before turning for the helm. Asha waited there, at the top of the gangplank, and turned to look back up at the heights of 10 towers. There, a pale ghost that might have been her mother. Beyond, a dark shadow that was likely her aunt. And here, waving down at her in farewell, with his ridiculous Mirish lenses perched on his nose, was the reader, as constant as the salt in the sea. Great WYK, then she said, and gestured for 2 of the lads to come forward and lift the plank. Best to set off with this fine wind behind them, and hope for the best ahead of them. Perhaps it was time to ride to Theon, far inland at Winterfell, and tell him that he ought to seek home. He would doubtless be next to useless after so long so far from the sea, but he might work as a symbol, or as a support. Because it was clear now, as clear as the sun in the sky above her, if Balon Greyjoy fell, Asha herself could well be all that stood between the crow's eye and the sea stone chair. Chapter 16, Sansa. Summary. Asterisk blows off the dust asterisk. Chapter text. Father permitted her to order a new gown for the tourney the king was hosting to honor father's appointment, and grumbled when the dressmakers the queen sent tried to convince her to choose something as low and sultry as the queen wore. Overbearingly warm and humid though King's Landing was, Sansa did not think she would ever wear the sort of gowns the queen favored, with their low backs and low fronts and bare arms. She said as much to Jane, who agreed, and to father, who was visibly relieved, and sent a note to the princess asking after a seamstress. What she got in return was a summons to Princess Myrcilla's Solar, in the Maiden Vault, home to the busiest corner of court. That had struck Sansa as strange from the off, but she felt it best to keep that to herself. There would have been questions asked at Winterfell, had Sansa kept a larger company than her lady mother, but no one seemed to find it odd that the princess had a whole tower full of maidens while the queen seemed to want only the Kingslayer's company. Jane clutched at Sansa's elbow as they were ushered into the huge, round room, pressing close in the face of the whirlwind of color and laughter that greeted them. It was utterly, utterly overwhelming, wild in a way Sansa would never have expected of the Southron court, and they remained planted carefully on the fringes until the princess emerged, dressed in dawn pink and flushed in the cheeks. "My lady, how lovely to see you," she said cheerfully, taking Sansa by the hand and pulling her into the melee. "Please, this way, come and meet my ladies." Lady Muriel and Lady Rosamund she already knew, the one she disliked and held in deepest suspicion, the other she liked, even if she did not trust Lady Rosamund's distant reserve and cool, pale eyes, but the rest were peculiar, in their way. Margaery Tyrell was every bit the beauty the Lannister girls had claimed on the road, lovely and delicate with intelligent golden brown eyes that looked Sansa over from crown to heel and seemed pleased when they had completed their journey. She matched Sansa's curtsy, one daughter of a lord paramount to another, and when Sansa withdrew her hand she found that Lady Margaery had pressed a slip of parchment into her palm. She hid it in her pocket for later perusal, back itching with discomfort at having already been swept into the court games father warned her of, before waving and disappearing into the tangle once more. She thought she might be able to become friends with Lady Margaery, though, given the chance, if only because Lady Margaery shut Lady Muriel up with a precise little remark, droll as any of the Lannister imps' storied jests, that left everyone else giggling. Sansa had never had that sort of talent with her words, and she saw something of Arya's sharp tongue in Lady Margaery's witticisms. Lady Margaery's cousins rushed by in a blur of curling hair and coquettish smiles, all sumptuously dressed and all pretty in the same wholesome, full way of Lady Margaery. There was an Alla and a Mega, and she thought an Eleanor, but she couldn't swear to it. They seemed pleasant enough, though, so she supposed they couldn't be as bad as the Lannister girls. There were more of them, too. Lady Muriel's sister, Serena, was meek as Muriel was haughty, but prettier to such an obvious degree that it was likely part of the reason for Lady Muriel's lack of manners. There's a Lady Lana Just who was also obviously a Lannister, with dark green eyes and overstyled hair. She seemed older than everyone else, perhaps a matron set to watch them, and had less interest in Sansa than even Muriel did. Was she there on the Queen's orders, Sansa wondered. For she seemed to watch the Tyrell girls far more intently than she did the other Lannisters. It seemed strange that there were no ladies from elsewhere but the Westerlands and the Reach, but again, Sansa said nothing. She would ask father if there was any significance to that tonight at dinner, and if he had no advice to give her, she would write to mother. "Come, my lady," the princess said, appearing again with a slight, dark-haired girl at her side. "This is my dearest friend, Eliza of House Santiago. Eliza will help yourself and Mistress Poole navigate these choppy waters of mine." Lady Eliza curtsied deeply, and Sansa hesitated before not quite equaling it. Santiago was a Dornish name, of middling rank, but Sansa couldn't be sure how Lady Eliza's position as the princess' closet companion might change her rank within the court. "Don't mind her, my lady," Lady Eliza said. "It's not usually so wild as this here. Come along, my lady, Mistress Poole, there are fitting stools waiting for you just over her." Lady Eliza, Sansa noticed, walked with a heavy limp, and took a pair of elegant crutches from a waiting attendant with fervent thanks as soon as Sansa and Jane were within reach of the empty stools. "Forgive me, my lady, Mistress Poole," she said, smile a little rueful. "My father thinks it rude when I use my crutches about court, but I simply cannot spend the whole day without them. Do you mind?" "Not at all," Sansa said, wondering just why a young lady should even need crutches. "Are you in pain, my lady?" "Nay, Lady Sansa, just tired," Lady Eliza assured her. "My foot and ankle are a little weak, and the crutches ease the strain, that is all. Now, if you will excuse me, I suspect I will be summoned any moment to Selaz's side." "My ladies." She somehow managed a curtsy on her crutches, and Sansa caught Jane's eye as soon as they were alone. Jane shrugged, as baffled as Sansa, and then jumped when two seamstresses appeared suddenly with huge baskets of supplies. Dinner with father that evening was a subdued affair. "There was a letter from Rob this morning," he said, pouring her a cup of honey milk. "Bran is awake." "That is good news, isn't it?" she asked, unsure why he looked so unhappy about it. Sansa had worn out her skirts praying for Bran to wake. "How is he? Does he know what caused him to fall?" "No, he says he doesn't remember," father said. "And I could not be more thankful that he is awake, but the circumstances of it are less than ideal." "Father." "An assassin broke into Bran's rooms," he said, looking her straight in the eye to be sure she was listening. "Your mother was injured before Bran's wolf could kill the man. Sir Roderick plans to investigate, but this does mean that we must be more careful than ever, sweeterling. I am not sure if you should spend more time with the princess and her ladies, unless it cannot be avoided." "I don't think I mind that overmuch," she admitted. "The maiden vault was very busy. I am unused to such a place." She had no intention of becoming used to it, either. Winterfell had never been so unruly, and Last Hearth would be quieter again. Sansa belonged in those places though, and never would here. The Lannister ladies had made sure she and Jane knew that, at least. "I thought you would enjoy it," father said, sounding surprised. "You have always wanted to come south, to see court, is it not to your liking?" "Well," she said, considering. "It is not as I imagined it would be, I suppose. It will take a little while for me to become accustomed to it, that is all. I promise." Father seemed satisfied with that, and waved the servants forward with their food. She managed to turn the conversation to the happier parts of Rob's letter, that Bran had named his wolf, that Arya had struck up something of an apprenticeship with Maester Lewin which let her escape Septum Ordain for at least part of the day, that Rickon had managed to finagle a horse out of the stables right under Hullen's nose, and so father did not even notice her hiding her mutton in her napkin. Bran was awake, no matter all her prayers. Sansa had begun to doubt that he would ever rise from his sickbed, and so the worries Rob had shared mattered little, for tonight at least. She could worry over Lady Margaery's note instead. "When help is required, do not be afraid to seek it among the roses." I apologize for the other day, the princess said, guiding Sangza once more into the maiden vault. We are never so mad as when the seamstress's visit, and it was unkind of me to introduce you to everyone on such a day. When Sangza stepped into the great round room, there were only 3 ladies present, Lady Margaret, Lady Eliza, and Lady Rosamond. Arrayed around a small round table as they were, Sangza felt they looked like some sort of council, with the princess as their head. Curious. Everything about King's Landing was curious. Come, sit a while with us, Lady Margaret said, blinking her doe's eyes slowly, acknowledging Sangza's questioning brow with a demure little smile. I promise we won't scandalize you too horribly, Lady Sangza. Unless you should like to scandalize us in return, Lady Rosamond said over her shoulder. Your betrothed is quite handsome enough to scandalize half the realm, I think. They were playing cards, Sangza realized. Lady Rosamond was shuffling, and dealt Sangza in without asking as soon as she sat down. They were pretty cards, with Queen Circe as the queen and King Robert as the king, and Uncle Jamie makes a fine knave, doesn't he? Princess Ursula asked mildly, with something of a razor's edge in her faint smile. So everyone says, or so I'm told. No one would dare say it where it might reach the princess' delicate ears. Be kind, Sela, Lady Eliza said warningly. It is not Lady Sangza's fault that your parents have quarreled again. It is not anyone's fault at all. Do your parents quarrel, Lady Sangza? The princess asked, still showing that hint of a smile that set Sangza all on edge. Do they fight at night when they think you all are sleeping? Or do they? Enough, Ursula, Lady Rosamond said sharply. You do yourself and Lady Sangza both a great dishonor by treating her so meanly. She is to be your sister, act like it. The princess flushed, but looked cowed rather than angry. Sangza was thankful for that. Forgive me, Lady Sangza, she said. It has been a trying morning, and I am ashamed to have behaved so poorly. It is forgotten, and we are all friends again, Lady Margaret said easily, casting Sangza a sidelong glance while the others were frowning at one another. Come, let us play, and afterwards we might show Lady Sangza the gardens. Would that they were more than passable. Snob, Lady Rosamond said fondly. We can't all come from High Garden, Mark, no more than we all can ask for such history as the Rock or Winterfell, don't you agree, Sangza? Sangza was startled at being addressed so directly, but she mustered up her best smile. I cannot comment on either High Garden or Casterly Rock, she said, as diplomatically as she could, but I cannot imagine anywhere quite like Winterfell, it is true. All 4 hooted as though she'd made some clever jape, and Lady Margaret gave her another of those demure smiles. You'll do quite well here, I think, she said, patting Sangza's hand. Stay close by us, and you'll never have to worry about anyone else. Lady Eliza said nothing, but she was looking at Lady Margaret's hand on Sangza's with open concern. That worried Sangza almost as much as father's fears had, although she couldn't have said why. Chapter 17, Robert. Notes. Holler. Chapter text. It was getting colder every day, and that made the shakes worse. Fits and shivers could only be hidden to a point. No matter how elegant the robes Giles found were, no matter how beautiful Joy's embroidery on his padded sleeves was, Robert's hands trembled at least half of the time. The cold, sharp air did seem to make thinking a little easier. Not so easy as the sea air of the Rock had, of course, but it was still a little easier now than it had been when he first came home. He only hoped that it lasted. The clearer his mind, the more capable he would be. Here, Terence said, wrapping him in a heavy fur that smelled of camphor. Keep yourself warm, Robin, the better to keep away the shakes. Terence's long hands fussed at the collar, and he took the robe Joy held out with a smile of thanks. Giles was away with Lord Nestor, digging through Robert's lady mother's accounts to salvage what of her stolen gold they could. It was proving more a struggle than anyone had expected, because she seemed to have sequestered it in strange, awkward ways, and Lord Littlefinger and his friends were reaping the benefits. Robert had written to Lord Tywine, asking for the use of one of his many accountants. If anyone could return the gold to its rightful place, it would be one of Lord Tywine's coin chasers, and Robert would gladly pay the tax he knew Lord Tywine would demand as payment. Anything, to break his mother's desperate hunger for power. Joy pressed a cup into his hand that near scalded his palm, but he drank it down in 2 long swallows all the same. That way, he wouldn't have to taste Maester Creelan's vile, glorious tinctures, and would get all their benefits. Terence kept on fussing until Robert stopped gagging, and then swapped the hot cup for a glass of water. It took at least half a jug of water to wash away the taste of the tinctures, and sometimes sweet tea, too, but his shakes were only mild and his chest much clearer. Any noxious taste was worth it, for that. "Your lady mother's been asking for you again this morning," Joy said quietly, sliding a heavy signet ring onto Robert's finger. "She's protesting her imprisonment and torture again, Robin." As if confinement to her rooms and the removal of her ladies was torture. Imprisonment, yes, because Robert wasn't sure she could be trusted not to act against him if given the run of the castle, but hardly torture. She was still well fed, not quite so well as before, admittedly, since he'd seen fit to deny her the sweets and sweet wine she'd become so bloody fond of, and well kept, and had no real cause to complain. Her confinement had even allowed him to intercept a letter or two from her beloved Petter. Perhaps he would go to her this morning, and bring those letters with him. It would do her no harm to be made aware of how public her folly had become. "Lord Nestor has been heard to suggest that it might be best to marry your mother to someone known to be loyal," Robin Joy said quietly. "And it has been suggested to him in return that he, in the absence of a Lady Royce, might be a suitable suitor." Terence's face was neutral to a degree that even Maester Crelan, who Robert had never seen react to anything, would have done well to manage. Robert and Joy had discussed Terence and Giles at great length, and had agreed that Giles' outward shows of devotion were nothing compared to Terence's quiet competence and care. They would never have discussed such a thing with Giles present, for fear that all his time in Lord Nestor's company had transferred his effusive loyalty to Robert's Lord Regent. He had no such fears regarding Terence. Lord Nestor had spoken favourably of Sir Lyn Corbray, and Robert had noticed the way Terence's shoulders had shot high and tight. Joy had asked some of her delicate, pointed questions, and Robert had vowed to keep Lyn Corbray as far from the Eyrie as he feasibly could without killing the bastard. Failing that, he would keep Sir Lyn as far from Terence as he could. Lord Tywine suffered many horrors, and even indulged in things of equal evil if the stories were to be believed, but this was insufferable. Terence's father was one of the most powerful men in the Vale, simply for the acreage of his holdings and the many men who lived there, and to tempt Lord Linderley's enmity was not something Robert wished to risk. Terence was Robert's friend, too. Robert had so few friends that he would risk some little discord among his lords to make those treasured few safe. "Come, then," he said, once Terence had settled his robe and Joy had satisfied herself with straightening his thick, dark hair. "To my lady mother's rooms, for all that I should rather face open battle, and after that, breakfast." "I will not be dictated to by a child," Lady Lysa said, chin raised and eyes closed. "I shan't, sweet Robin, I simply won't." "You have no choice, my lady," Robert said, leaning over the back of a chair opposite his mother. "Lord Nestor as my regent supports me in barring your contact with Lord Baelish, much less your betrothal, and he is my vassal, too, and would do well to remember that when stealing from my treasury." "It is not just your treasury," she snapped, turning her fierce, angry eyes on Robert. "I am your lady mother, and had your father not been such a distrustful, malicious old bastard, he—" "Enough!" Robert shouted. "I will not hear my lord father spoken of in this manner. You are here under my sufferance, my lady, and I am not inclined to allow you to remain if you do not remember your place." "You are just like your grandfather," she said, color flooding her soft cheeks and fire catching in those pale blue eyes. "Spiteful and cruel and full of malice, all in the name of honor." "It may be that I am growing in Lord Tully's likeness," Robert said, moving around the table to look her straight in the face. He felt stiff with temper, angrier than he had ever been, and wondered why she was being so difficult. "Perhaps if I am, I will be able to control you." "I am a widow," she shrieked, circling round to stand over him, damn her for being tall, and damn himself for being so ill that he hadn't grown tall as her or broad as his father. "I am in control of my own life, child. Not while you remain under my roof." Robert bit back. "You say that you are Lady Erin, and yes, that is your name, but you are not Lady of the Eyrie, and as such, I have removed you from any position of authority you may have enjoyed during your marriage to my lord father." "Enjoyed? And I will not tolerate your foolishness." She slapped him. Of all the things she might have done, this was the very last thing he could have expected, and he was glad of Giles' strong arm behind his back. "Lord Nestor," he said, once he was back on his feet. Send for Sir Brindan at the bloody gate. I would have him bring my mother home. Ah, that stopped her in her damned tracks. What do you mean, she asked. What do you mean, send me home? This is my home. I am your mother. I will remain with you. I am sure my Lord Grandfather would be happy to receive you at Riverrun, Robert said, as cold and without emotion. He understood why Lord Tywine was always so withdrawn, now. Because unless you drastically alter your behavior, I will not be happy to keep you here. She retreated to her bedchamber with a wail, slamming the door in her wake in a show of such childish temper that Robert wished he might slap her, if only to shock her out of it. What news of Lord Baelish, then? He asked once he and Giles and Terence and Joy had retreated to his solar. There were letters from Winterfell, condolences and offers of friendship, and Robert would deal with those in time. For now, though, the more important letters were from what little remained of his father's household in King's Landing. They had surely left the city by now, but the ravens they had sent had made it home ahead of them, and Robert was glad of it. I wonder if your Lord Father knew how often Lord Baelish visited with your lady mother, Robin Giles said, his round face folding like a ball of dough in his disgust. Gods preserve us, even if they were close as children, this is far beyond unseemly. How often? Robert asked, looking up from his letter, a detailed account of the Lord Hand's spending on food, truly riveting stuff. Weekly. Every few days. Daily, Giles said, passing the letter across the table. Sometimes twice daily, and often late in the evening. Robert glanced over the letter and then passed it to Terence, who passed it to Joy. She cannot be allowed to marry him, Terence said. Even if he weren't a whoremonger with a nasty reputation such as he is, well. All these visits, Robin, and your Lord Father's steward says they go back years, look here. If she is allowed to wed him, and these visits are brought to light, well, Joy said. Robin, it might. My father never sired a living child, Robert agreed. Would that my mother had a single ounce of sense. Does she not understand that this will cast doubt on my damned legitimacy? Is she really so selfish that she would risk everything just for the sake of a I don't even know what to call it. I don't think it's selfishness, Robin, Joy said, leafing through another set of letters altogether. Oh, gods above, Robin, look at these letters between them. He wrote his replies on the backs of hers, but I don't know that I want to see those, Joy, Robert said, not if they have you quite so scandalized as this. Those letters would have to be burned, probably, unless his Lord Father's steward could assure him that his lady mother had not been cuckolding her husband with some no-account coin-counter from the meanest reaches of the fingers. Robert was weak enough that many of his lords would no doubt welcome a chance to see him cast aside in Cousin Harold's favor. He could not let that be. The Arryn words were as high as honor, and Harold's behavior showed little enough of that. Robert would have to survive long enough to continue his father's line, and survive as Lord Arryn at that. Joy's hands landed heavy on his shoulders, firm even through his layers of furs and silk, and he sighed. He hadn't even noticed her rising from her seat, but he was thankful for it all the same. My uncle will be here as soon as he can, Robert said, hoping the Blackfish was as sensible as his legend was wild, and Lord Royce of Runestone, and half a dozen others. Perhaps with all of them on hand, we might shackle my mother. He wrapped his fingers around Joy's, relishing the warmth of her hands, and sighed. I love her, he said, leaning his head into his other hand. I love my lady mother very much, but this cannot be tolerated. I simply don't understand what I am to do with her. Chapter 18, Myrcella. Summary. The tourney of the hand arrives, and brings with it many challenges. Notes. Victory Hand smiling face with sunglasses. Chapter text. Elissa had been troubled by her bad foot since before the royal party had returned to King's Landing. It had taken stern orders from her father to make her rest, and a disapproving letter from her faraway grandmother in Dawn to make her accept the care of the maesters. I don't see the need for such fuss, she grumbled, tipping her head over the back of her couch while a maid rubbed a greasy salve into her ankle and foot. Myrcella had never known anything Maester Pycelle offered to do any good to Elissa's leg, and she knew that Sir Aaron had kept little faith in the Grand Maester since his failure to alleviate Lys' suffering when they were children. Myrcella could not blame him for that. This, though, had come from the Spotswood, with that same disapproving letter from Lys' grandmother, and there would be no peace until Lady Anna was satisfied that it had been used. My leg is short, and there's naught to be done for it. No lotions or potions will stretch it out to match the other. Stop being so realistic and relish the tender care, Elisa Rosa chided, smoothing down Elisa's hair as she passed. Your papa worries for you. There are many greater sins in this world than a parent's love. Ursula did not look up from her hoop, afraid of what might show on her face. She could not imagine her Lord Father taking enough notice of her to worry for her health unless it threatened her betrothal to Robb Stark. No matter that he loved her better than he did Joff or Tommen, and he did, of that she was certain, he would leave her to her mother's care unless her ill health infringed on some scheme or plot of his own. Ursula could still remember Elisa's illness, when they were children, and remembered well how much trouble Sir Aaron had caused at the time. He had abandoned his duties to oversee her care, and it had taken Sir Barristan's intervention to prevent the king from stripping him of his position. Neither Ursula's father nor her mother would ever do such a thing, not for her or Tommen. Her lady mother might for Joff, but not for her other children. Rosamund returned at last to her seat at Ursula's side, leaning close enough that their shoulders pressed together for just a moment, a silent comfort. Ursula loved Rosa very much, but sometimes she hated her, too. It was too dangerous to be transparent at court, and Rosa had always been able to see right through her. That was the trouble with having grown up together, her and Rosa and Miri and Liz. There could be no secrets between them, not truly. Have you had any word from the cobbler? Miriel asked, in one of the brief flashes of heart she saved for Liz, because a lame Dornish girl could be no competition to a Lannister, and for Joff, because poor Miri truly seemed to think he might choose her as his queen someday. If we can source those shoes the Lysani woman recommended, it might help some. I am quite satisfied with my crutches, as I have told you 1,000 times, Elisa said, even as she reached out to squeeze Miri's hand. But Papa has enquired with a number of cobblers, I promise, and if he has any success you will be the first to know. Ursula still did not look up from her hoop. She had always had septars and maids to see to her needs, and could not imagine what it would be like to have parents who took such a keen interest in her well-being. Perhaps such things were not to be, not among such lofty personages as kings and lords paramount. But does Margaery's father not dote on her? She thought, miserable. Does Lord Stark not share his evening meal with sweet Sansa every day? Ursula could not remember when last she had shared a meal alone with her father. Dining with her mother usually brought Uncle Jamie's company as well, which meant her lady mother's attention was consumed utterly. Only Tommen was still forced to endure their mother's table every evening, and Ursula would soon be free of dining with Lord Tywin's children forever, away from oblivious Uncle Jamie and cutting Uncle Tyrion, sitting on either side of her mother while she seethed. She wondered what it would be like to dine at Winterfell without the king in attendance. She could not imagine Lady Stark limiting Ursula's plate for fear she might gain an inch on her waist. Needless to say I won't be dancing after Lord Stark's tourney, Elisa said, the right turn of her smile drawing a little laughter. I rather think it's Lady Sansa who will be stealing away your partners, my dears. Such an exciting little thing, isn't she? That finally drew Ursula's head up. None of them really knew what to make of Sansa Stark just yet, who was so sweet and open, but who had so little interest in forging a true place for herself at court. It was so very strange, even knowing that she would not be staying more than a year or two, to see someone who seemed not to understand that politics could not be ignored. Whether she was foolish or brave was yet to be determined. Even with that, though, her delicate, simple manners were hardly exciting, no matter how polite and pretty she was. Ursula was sure that she would not be the center of things, not once Joff's little friends had been in their cups. Don't be jealous, Sela Margaery called from across the room. A girl as pretty as Lady Sansa is bound to draw eyes upon her arrival, they'll remember your golden charms soon enough. Why should I be jealous of the girl who will soon buy my good sister? Ursula said, hoping no blush would betray her. Lady Sansa is prettier than most of us, Margaery pointed out, winking one bright eye. And a novelty, and the Hand's own daughter. Do you think an ambitious young man will consider her precious betrothal a true impediment? She'll be inundated with requests for her company. Whether or not she condescends to share her company is something else entirely, Miriel said, rolling her eyes. She more than anyone disliked Sansa, likely because of Joff's strange fascination with her. If anyone was jealous of Sansa's prettiness, it was surely Miri. Ursula was confident in her own beauty, sure that her resemblance to her lady mother would put her ahead of any company. She's very snobbish, I think. Has she accepted a single invitation from any one of us? Not since the day the dressmakers took her measurements. Perhaps she's shy, Rosa said mildly, rolling her eyes for everyone's benefit but Muriel's. Not everyone can have your bottomless confidence, Miri. Some of us are more aware of our shortcomings, and Lady Sangza must surely feel the gulf between her manners and ours. I thought her manners more than sufficient, Margari said, tone a little sharper than Myrcella really thought was fair. Of course there was a difference between Lady Sangza and themselves, because Winterfell couldn't aspire to King's Landing's grandeur, and the steward's daughter who served as her companion was hardly comparable to Myrcella's ladies. Lady Sangza's care with her words and her sharp eye for the offences of others would serve her well, no doubt, but she had a long way to go before she would match. But mayhaps that was not such a terrible thing. Myrcella had prettier manners than anyone else in the city, and she could hardly wait to escape. That might have spoken more to her family than to court itself, but it could be exhausting. It could have been that Lady Sangza was right to hold herself at arm's length. Will you dance, Selai? Elissa asked, giving Margari the most curious look. I have wondered if some of your most ardent admirers will persist, even against your coming change of status. Cousin Lancel certainly would not be deterred, no doubt just as confident as Myrcella privately was that her Lord Grandfather would dislike both her betrothal and Lord Stark's appointment as Hand. Yes, her Lord Grandfather had assumed that the handship would be his upon Lord Arryn's passing, and rightly so. There was no man in Westeros who had done more for the realm, in all his long years of service. Of course his infamous pride was wounded by having been passed over for the sake of boyhood friendship when he had sheer incomparable competence to offer. Lord Tywin's disapproval was not lightly borne, not even by the king, and Myrcella had been wondering what concessions her father would have to give her grandfather to salve the sting of allowing him no say in her future. No doubt she would be overrun with Westermen, all driven by a quiet suggestion from Uncle Kevan that perhaps the princess should be discouraged from her northern match, or a teasing jape from Aunt Jenna about the suitability of a savage bridegroom for a bride of such paramount blood. Lord Tywin was a man who caught all attempts at injury and returned them threefold, and Myrcella worried constantly what that would mean for her Lord Father. Even without her Lady Mother's efforts, Lord Tywin's influence was a magnificent thing, and Myrcella wanted to be sure of her future before he could crush it. If Lord Tywin brought enough pressure to bear against the king, Myrcella might well lose her chance to share in Robb Stark's warm smile against all that cold. It all depended on the king keeping his word. But Robert Baratheon had left much of his spine at the Trident, and it was easier to talk him out of things than to talk him in. It would not take much for Myrcella to find herself with a cousin whose face matched hers as closely as her mother and Uncle Jaime's, or the son of some esteemed, ancient house who had paid Lord Tywin the right lip service, who would be as suitable a husband for her as her Lord Father was for her Lady Mother. And he would not have that warm smile, against all that cold. She was more perturbed than she would ever admit to anyone, even to Lys, by the thought of Lord Tywin's intervention. They had not been long at Winterfell, but even with Sir Aris sticking to her like a limpet, she had taken enough of a measure of her betrothed to know that she liked him. Even her mother, who hated the Starks for no apparent reason, could say little truly bad of them, and if even Cersei Lannister could speak no ill of a man, then that surely meant that Lord Stark was equal to his reputation. Surely such a man would raise his son in his image. No matter. If something prevented her marriage to Robb Stark, Myrcella would make the best of her lot as her mother had not. If it went ahead, she would do the same. That was as much control as she could hope to exert over her future. If she used her power wisely, she could perhaps create a kinder childhood for her own children than she or Tommen had been allowed. Still with us, cousin. Serena's perfect face appeared over Myrcella's shoulder, the satiny spill of her hair framing a beauty that even the queen envied. If only Serena had the sense to make use of her face. She was truly gorgeous, and had a nature sweet enough to tempt even the sourest of men, but her head was utterly empty. Myrcella could not imagine another woman in the world so vacant as Serena Lannister. Davin and Muriel had been blessed with all the wits in that house, that was certain. I am here, Rena, Myrcella promised her, kissing her pearly pink cheek. No matter how stupid Serena might have been, it was the cardinal sin of the maiden vault to upset her. For as long as you will have me. Serena rewarded her with a beaming smile, prettier than the maiden herself, and rambled away, perfectly beautiful, but as clever and graceful as a duck on land. It was only fair. You do seem somewhat absent, Rosa murmured, knocking their crossed feet together without ever looking away from Muriel, away across the room, here and there but never near to Margary. Trouble, cousin. Always, dear Ursula said, smiling a little. But not for now. Come, the dressmakers are due back this evening. Did you decide on your sleeves? The dressmakers did indeed arrive, bringing with them the gowns they all had ordered for Lord Stark's tourney. Ursula was under strict orders from her lady mother to wear red or green, and so she had ordered the pale pink she had always favored. It put roses in her cheeks, and the thread of gold embroidery was her favorite. Her lord father had once told her she looked very pretty in a pink gown, when she was a little girl, and while she had outgrown the delusion that he would ever think to compliment her again, she had retained her preference for pink. Nothing else suited her quite so well save green, which was so much her mother's color that she hated to wear it most of the time. You should wear a lower cut, one of the Tyrells said from somewhere behind her. I'd wear a lower cut if I had teats like yours, Marg. Margary's gown was an exquisite thing, as usual, a rich dark blue, like the sea god in Ursula's tapestry, simple to the point of plainness but cut so perfectly to her shape that it seemed far lovelier than Ursula's more ornate choice. Margary's taste was unparalleled, subtle in a way Ursula never quite managed, and a surprisingly effective balance against Renly's exuberance. Margary rarely wore a low-cut gown such as those Ursula's mother favored, even though she did have a lovely figure. Ursula usually refused such things solely because her mother favored them, her mother and the sort of women her father took to bed. She did like a low back, though. It felt more elegant, at ease, to wear her hair down and have the pale skin of her shoulders peek through the gold. It left all her many suitors without the option of speaking to her breasts, too, when they attempted to flirt. Would Robb Stark have looked at her breasts while they walked the walls of Winterfell, had she worn less sensible gowns? She did not know. She did not think she would have minded, had he layered just a little. You should wear your hair up, Muriel said, gathering Ursula's curls into a loose twist at her nape. It makes you look very elegant. Like a swan, almost. Or a goose, Ursula said, sharing a rare, genuine smile with Miri. She had always hated wearing her hair pinned back because she had the misfortune of having inherited her father's big ears, and hated to draw attention to them. What of you, Muriel? Are you well satisfied? Muriel's gown was, of course, crimson velvet, utterly gorgeous and far too heavy for the sticky humidity that had descended on the city these past few days. Miri was slim to the point of skinny, something Ursula had always been jealous of, and was able to get away with more daring gowns than most because she had so little bosom to display. If only she were as sweet as Serena, or as clever as Rosamund. As it was, Muriel had bare ambition and an eye for weakness, and when she wasn't making a nuisance of herself Ursula sometimes felt a little sorry for her. The second daughter of even a cadet branch of a family like House Lannister could do well for herself, if she played her lord's games, but Muriel had neither the subtlety nor the will that Ursula's lord grandfather preferred. She was too obvious, reaching for things not hers without the strength of arm or character to claim them. Nothing was outside Lord Tywin's reach. A shame that so many cousins had failed to understand that his reach was not theirs. Renly is thinking of having a little party, the night after the final joust, Margaery said, holding a narrow length of embroidered silk against the dark blue of her gown. No doubt she would make a crown of it in her perfect chestnut curls for the tourney, and all her cousins would mirror it, if plainly. Ursula could only dream of having such exacting control over her cousins, but Lannisters were fiercer beasts than the roses of Highgarden, and would not be so easily tamed. "Isn't there to be a feast, Marg?" Elissa called from her comfortable seat in the window. The view was grim, as all views were from the Maiden Vault, but it was the best seat in Ursula's solar all the same. "I can't imagine the king will be pleased if Lord Renly and all his friends slip away for a jollier time." "I can't imagine that Lord Renly will care," Lady Lana said tartly, half-waist to a martel banner with the fall of her bright hair against her dark orange silks. Everyone would laugh if Ursula said that, save for Elissa, who knew well how the Reachers hated her and the Lannisters looked down on her, and so Ursula said nothing. Cruelty and cutting had their places, but not at Lys' expense. When has the king's censure ever stopped him? If his brothers feared him, then Stannis would not be squirreled away on Dragonstone in a sulk. If the king's disapproval mattered so much, Rosa murmured, drifting past in a cloud of pale turquoise, then Lord Tywin would not be squirreled away at the Rock in a sulk, either. I think perhaps it is not for us to think too hard on my uncle's motivations, Lady Just Mercilla said firmly, ignoring how Rosa's assessment stung. Lord Tywine was not a man to sulk. For now, it would be best to make nice with Renly, no trial. He had grown in influence with her father this past year or so, ever since his betrothal to Margaery. Not so much that he could turn the tide of the king's behavior, not when even Lord Arryn's cool, capable hands had failed to guide that tiller, but enough to shift the makeup of his household. Lord Dondarrion particularly had been a victory for Uncle Renly, for his permanent appointment to the king's household had ousted Robbie Brax, if she recalled correctly. She usually did. It would not have done to forget slights done by her parents. She had learned that a soothing word and a sympathetic ear could earn all sorts of forgiveness on the king and queen's behalf, but to do so meant keeping a catalogue of all the many insults her parents dealt without meaning to or caring about it. She usually relied on Uncle Renly's help in such things, but given he had been so involved in House Brax's displeasure, well, she was quite without help. She could only suppose that her Lord Grandfather had offered some balance, to take the sting out of Sir Robert's removal from court, and marked it as another debt she owed him. There are always parties after the feast, Mercilla said, trying to appear as unaffected as possible. She had not considered it, but with the Tyrells behind him it would not be impossible that Renly might consider himself a suitable hand for her Lord Father. Mercilla couldn't say one way or the other if he might be good at it, certainly he was clever enough, and so inured to her father's temper and violence that he might be better suited than anyone to work with the king. But the realm did not need someone who indulged the king. The realm needed someone to control him. Lord Stark seemed to be making a good start of it, shaming Mercilla's father into behaving at least a touch better than usual, but she did not think he had the taste for politics needed to survive in the Tower of the Hand for very long. If Renly was throwing parties, that might well serve to make more friends for him. Renly was by far the most popular of House Baratheon among the younger set, who seemed not so far off becoming the Lords of Westeros in their own right, instead of just bearing their fathers' names in the capital. It would not be difficult for him to build on that popularity, and if he promised to take the burdensome business of ruling from her father's weary shoulders, well, he would be king in all but name. Until father drinks and eats and whores himself to death, and Joff takes the throne. Gods be good, she was turning into her lady mother. Renly had given her no reason to mistrust him, so Margaery had been her friend for many years, and her father, while not healthy, exactly, was still a far distance from his deathbed. Her grandfather was not to be dismissed, true, but in the 7 kingdoms of House Baratheon, was House Lannister really so all-powerful as Lord Tywine liked to believe? There was no need for this paranoia, this misery. She would wait, and see if any evidence for her churning belly arose. Renly is sure to be very fine, she said, not daring to meet Alyssa's eye. If Rosa always saw through her, then Lys always saw to the heart of her, and Mercilla was not sure enough of her heart in that moment to risk sharing it with anyone. She trusted Alyssa as much and more as she trusted Rosa, but even so. Openness was the next thing to weakness at court, everyone knew that. It will just be a quiet affair, I'm told, Margaery said airily, slipping a flash of gold into the seamstress' hand with a wink. Just a select few friends, a sort of prelude to our wedding, where we might shorten the guest list a little. How very sweet of him, Alyssa said, lifting her book to hide her face. What an attentive husband he will surely make, Marg. When is the wedding, after all? Just next month, as you well know, Margaery said, sticking out her tongue to the great amusement of her cousins and friends. Do try not to be so sour, Lys, I promise I won't entirely abandon you upon my marriage, that disdain should be reserved all for our dear princess. And wasn't that the rub? Mercilla could not wait to be away from her father's mortifying self-indulgence, could not wait to be out from under her mother's thumb, but she had never been without company. She had seen little evidence of Lady Stark keeping a personal household, and certainly her daughters had only the daughters of Winterfell's Master of Arms and Steward for companions. It seemed terribly lonely, away in the wide, empty north with only her husband for company. Then again, if they got along well enough, perhaps that would be no terrible trial. I will visit, probably, she said, smiling her thanks to the seamstress who'd just finished her hem. Winterfell is not so very far away. I don't think many castles are further, really, Muriel said with one of her sharp-nosed smiles. Only that hovel sweet Sansa is bound for, I think. Lucky Sella, Lys said, still half hiding behind her book. "Luckier Lady Sansa, that they should be so far away from you, Miri." Even Lady Lana laughed at that. When the king decided to gather together his family so they might dine together, none of them enjoyed it. They could not say no, though, and so it was that Myrcella had to allow her maids to pile her hair up as her mother preferred, and then to follow alongside Sir Aris to her father's dining room. It was a beautiful room, high in the keep with wide windows looking down across the city to the Sound, and it smelled of stale ale and seemed always to echo with a recent belch. Myrcella's father had so little care for how he appeared, but when he was in good humor she could not be angry with him for it, he was always so pleased to see her. "Hello, golden girl," Renly said, greeting her with a kiss to the cheek just inside the door. "How pretty you look this evening. You may as well remain at the door, oh Kurt. She will be quite safe between myself and Lord Stark, I think." "As you say, my lord," Sir Aris said, not even looking at Renly. He bowed at the waist to Myrcella, though, and took up position just inside the door, blank-eyed with his hand resting on his pommel. He had an unnerving ability to shut himself away, to hide all the sweetness and concern he shared with her, that frightened her just a little. She aspired to that level of control, but also wondered what Sir Aris lost every time he hid himself within his white armor. "Mark should be here any minute," he said. "And apparently the Starks are to join us, if you can believe it." "He has more time for Lord Stark than for any of us, Uncle," she murmured. "A shame Uncle Stannis is not here to cause a row, isn't it? That might be the only thing that could stop my Lord Father's reminiscences of his time in the Eyrie, now that he has a witness to all his tall tales on hand to corroborate his heroics." Her lady mother and Uncle Jaime were present already, with Tommen and his kittens basking in a rare moment of attention from the king. It warmed Myrcella to see it. Tommen was largely ignored by both of their parents, dismissed at 1 and 10 as useless. Their lady mother seemed certain that Tommen would inherit Storm's End, a confidence that seemed odder and odder the closer they came to Renly and Margaery's wedding, but she also seemed sure that she would rule the Stormlands through Tommen. Myrcella wished that anyone besides her could see Tommen's quick mind and strong heart, but Joffrey stole away everyone's attention and left him bereft. "Ah," the king cried. "There she is. Come, my girl, come here, come sit with me for dinner, my girl." She made a point of kissing Tommen's snowy curls before dropping into a neat curtsy before her lord father. He did not seem as bleary-eyed drunk as he usually was at dinner, his hair combed and drawn back with a cord at his nape. She could not remember when last she had seen him look so well so late in the day, and leaned forward to kiss his bearded cheek without invitation. Perhaps, having Lord Stark at court would make her lord father remember the man he had once been. Perhaps Lord Stark could be a powerful good influence on the king. Perhaps. It was an unfair burden to lay on any man, but Myrcella could always dream. At least his good humor might make him more suggestible. "There we are, come now," he said, wrapping a massive arm around her shoulders. He kissed her temple, clearly pleased to have her near but obviously a little at a loss as to what to do with her, now that he had her. "You are well, my girl." "Yes, your grace," she promised him. "We all are looking forward to tomorrow's excitement very much." Well," he said, squeezing her a little and clapping a heavy hand to Tommen's shoulder. "We all will sit together on the morrow as well, yes. We should be honored, shouldn't we, Tommen?" she said, leaning around the king's bulk to smile at Tommen and ensure he was included. "I had hoped to speak with you about Tommen's training, my lord, perhaps tomorrow, while we are watching the tilting." "Had you indeed?" he boomed, laughing uproariously. "The boy is blessed to have a sister as attentive as you, my girl. Well, tomorrow, then, we will talk, and see if we cannot find a suitable swordsmaster for our Tommen." Myrcella kissed his cheek again in thanks. She had tried to raise the issue of seeing Tommen squired to someone who had the time to pay him some specific attention with her lady mother and with Uncle Jaime both, thinking that they might understand that she wanted Uncle Jaime to take Tommen as his squire. Of course they had not, or else they had and ignored her, but she knew better than anyone how to convince her father of what she wanted with a pretty smile and a sweet plea. If she was very careful, and very lucky, Tommen might be in white livery by the end of next week, squiring for Sir Barristan. "Thank you, your grace," she said, settling against his side. Renly gave her a curious look from where he was caught between Samandon and Joffrey, trying to avoid both. She shrugged to him, smiling as naturally as she could when Margaery arrived, with one of her interchangeable green cloaks taking up position outside the door. "Is this our party for dinner, Your Grace? As soon as Ned and his girl arrive, we'll eat," her Lord Father said. "You've been getting along well enough with her, I suppose. You've always made friends easily. You've that from me." Did she make friends easily? Perhaps, but only in the same shallow way her father did. Everyone in the court loved the king, but only for as long as they stood in his favor. As soon as he grew bored of them, they rejoined the whispering masses who saw the king for the drunken sot he had become since taking the throne. Myrsilla's friends seemed true enough, but she was too much her mother's daughter to trust in anyone much beyond Rosa and Elisa. It made it difficult to forge true friendship, no matter how much she might wish for it. She had Rosa, her mirror image. She had Liz, who she sometimes thought might be to her what Ned Stark was to her Lord Father. But beyond that, how could she have friends when everyone around her had their own interests at heart? "As you say, Your Grace," she said. "Lady Sansa is very sweet." That satisfied him for now, contenting him until Lord Stark and Lady Sansa arrived and, to a chorus of bawdy roars from her Lord Father, they all took their seats. Myrcilla found herself foolishly annoyed by the arrangement of their party, her Lord Father at the head of the table, of course, but with Lord Stark to his right hand where usually the Queen sat. Beyond him was Lady Sansa, then Renly and Margaery. Myrcilla found herself opposite Renly, which at least ensured her some interesting conversation, but she found herself less excited by her uncle's company than usual. She could not quite shake her concerns about this party of his, and wished suddenly for Uncle Tyrion to distract them all from their worries by raising a row with her lady mother. The first morning of the tourney was pleasant, not quite so sticky and humid as the days had been since their return from Winterfell. Myrcilla was glad she had chosen split sleeves for her gown all the same, because she knew that the sun would be searing hot by midday, even under the canopy over the royal box. Rosamund had chosen a dress almost identical to Myrcilla's own, soft, pale turquoise blue and a little lower in the front but almost a twin all the same. Rosamund had been chosen as a child to be Myrcilla's companion because of the similarity in their faces, something that had only grown more pronounced as they grew, in the hope that it might distract any would-be assailants for even just a moment, and she still generally followed Myrcilla's preferences even now. Muriel's brilliant crimson seemed sultry beside them. She looked an insufficient mirror of Myrcilla's lady mother, but wealthy. No matter that her gown was bought from Myrcilla's allowance, it will still draw the fortune chasers to her during the festivities later this evening. "I wonder if anyone will ask our favors," Rosa asked, gushing mockingly at the eager flush in Miri's cheeks. "No doubt some brave young Hotspur will seek yours, Sela, even in the face of your good father's disapproval, but what of us poor cousins? I will reserve mine for Sir Oris, if my uncle will not have it," Myrcilla said firmly, hiding a smile behind her cup. "What of you, Rosa? Will you not offer yours to some fine young blade, to see him to victory in the melee?" "Oh, I am sure that I will," Rosa said, grinning widely and fluttering a little with the pretty fan of creamy silk she had brought with her this morning. Myrcilla's was gold, Muriel's black, and they had all been gifts from Elisa. Myrcilla's lady mother looked down on them as Dornish follies, but they were invaluable in the sticky heat. "Perhaps someone particularly suitable will mistake me for you, and by the time I think to correct him it will be too late, and he will have ensnared a Lannisport Lannister in place of a princess of the realm." "You are terrible," Rosa Myrcilla said, reclining easily in her seat. Her parents were not present just yet, nor her brothers, but a great many other watchers had arrived. She raised a hand in greeting to Lord Stark and Lady Sansa, and was rewarded with a brief curtsy from Lady Sansa and a smile from Lord Stark so warm, so much like Rob's, that it startled her. Perhaps it was not so surprising that Lord and Lady Stark had 5 children after all. Lord Littlefinger was hovering nearby as well, his little book in hand, ready to coax coin from the unprepared, and Lord Varys in exquisite purple silk robes. There was Maester Pycelle, with his bag at the ready, and Margaery coming to sit with Lady Sansa. They looked very pretty together, Lady Sansa dressed pale like the dawn and Margaery in her midnight blue, and immediately Margaery drew Sansa into a conversation, abandoning poor Lord Stark to Lord Littlefinger's mercies. Myrcilla could hear her parents bickering long before she saw them, and rose to her feet before anyone else did. They were preceded by a pair of red cloaks, and arrived with matching scarlet cheeks, high tempers. Ursula was glad that she had not inherited that from either one of them, even if Joffrey had been blessed with both. "Good morning, your graces," she said, leading everyone in the stands into obeisance with a neat curtsy. "Brothers, good morning to you as well." Tommen settled easily into the chair nearest Ursula's, furthest from Joff's. It put him just below their Lord Father's left hand, and Ursula knew from experience that the king would ruffle Tommen's hair whenever he won a bet, and that would cheer Tommen for a week or more. Ursula kept her head down as her lady mother took her seat, knowing that the queen would disapprove of the little bit of stain she had applied to her lips that morning until she was enough into her cups to stop noticing such things. Joffrey, in Lannister crimson and with that stupid sword on his hip, took the seat below their father's right hand. By the time the first tilt was run, he would be complaining that he could topple any man he chose to ride against. Despite having never competed, their lady mother always recommended against it, and she was the only person he seemed to listen to. Ursula privately thought it seemed cowardly, for a prince of Dragonstone without apparent physical impediment to refuse to take up a lance, but she knew better than to say so. Even if her Lord Father defended her from Joffsire, her lady mother would never forgive her for criticizing Joffrey, even if she was careful to do it privately. "Will you be riding among the squires tomorrow, your highness?" Rosa asked, leaning forward between Ursula and Tommen's shoulders. Tommen loved Rosamund, and when he was very small, he used sometimes mistake her for Ursula. Luckily, Rosa loved Tommen in return. "I should love to see you a horse. You showed so well on the road to Winterfell." "Not until I can squire for someone who might train me," Tommen said, looking glum. "But Selai asked father if he would find someone to take me. He promised we could speak on it more today, didn't he, Selai?" "He did indeed, dear one," she agreed, smoothing his curls with a grin. "So not tomorrow, but mayhap for the next tourney, and you might wear both mine and Rosa's favors." Tommen seemed pleased enough by that, and Rosa squeezed Ursula's shoulder. Miri was already leaning forward to try and catch Joff's eye. She would not, even Ursula, who tried to avoid noticing such things, knew which way Joff's preferences turned, and it was not to such slender beauty as Miriel's. "The sooner this all begins," Rosa breathed, right by Ursula's ear, "the sooner we can be done with it." The box creaked with the arrival of the hound, taking up his place behind Joffrey. His arrival coincided neatly with the first of the riders' arrival on the lists, for their presentation to the king, led by the Lord Commander, then Uncle Jaime, then Sir Loras, Uncle Renly, on and on past cloaks of red and gold and white and grey and green. Sir Barristan never asked anyone's favour, but Uncle Jaime offered his lance to the Queen and was rewarded with red velvet. Sir Loras held out his hand to the waiting Margaery as he passed, laughing when she tossed a white rose wrapped about with twined green and gold ribbons, and Uncle Renly stopped before Ursula. "Golden girl," he said, offering her his arm. "Might I humbly beg your favour?" Perhaps, she thought, tying a broad golden ribbon, embroidered by her own hand with the crowned stag around his arm, it is not Sir Barristan who could shape Tommen best. Perhaps it is best that at least one of us knows Storm's End. "Always, uncle," she said, leaning over the railing to kiss his cheek, earning a great cheer from the commons across the field. "Upon whom else should I bestow it, if not you?" He raised his arm then, the gold so very bright against the dark green plate, and roused another cheer. The commons loved Renly, who had his own coffers and those of Highgarden to draw from when he stretched out his open hand toward Flea Bottom. Ursula wished her parents had the sense to make an occasional show of charity, even if only through almsgiving on feast days, but her Lord Father was too thoughtless and her Lady Mother too haughty. She had tried, last year on Maiden's Day, and had had to write to her Lord Grandfather to beg the funds. Lord Tywine had acquiesced, much to her surprise, and the brief note he had sent with the coin had been slightly less brief than usual, an unprecedented sign of approval. She loathed owing anything to Lord Tywine, even just her thanks, but her parents had left her with no choice. Her Lord Father had waved her off toward Lord Littlefinger, who was a miser unless he saw personal benefit to the spending of the king's coin, and her Lady Mother had made no secret of thinking the commons unworthy of any sort of charity at all. Ursula didn't really much care about the actual giving of the alms, but she knew that for the royal family to be seen as pious and generous could only be to their benefit. It was not enough simply to toss down their leftovers, as seemed the plan with this tourney. Poor Lord Stark, she thought, for he was plainly embarrassed when the king hailed him and dedicated the tourney to him. But perhaps King's Landing is no place for a shy man. Tommen, who had always been shy, gripped Myrsilla's arm as the first riders took their positions. No, perhaps it was best to get such creatures away from the city. There must be some way to manage it. The first time Myrsilla saw a corpse, she was 5 years old, 6 at most, and had been visiting with Uncle Stannis and Shireen on Dragonstone. She and Renly had visited Dragonstone half a dozen times over the years, always when Uncle Stannis had kept Shireen away for longer than a month or two, and Myrcilla had never taken to the island. It was plenty fine, of course, ground in a much stranger, more sinister way than King's Landing or Storm's End, and while a tiny thing compared to the Rock, it had always seemed just as full of hidden corners. After Shireen's sickness, the King and Queen had been reluctant to allow Myrcilla to visit Dragonstone for fear that her face would be marred as Shireen's was, but Renly had not been inclined to allow such a thing as royal disapproval to stop him. He had been 5 and 10 and fearless, and he had stolen her away as a treat. She had always loved the journey to Dragonstone, at least. She loved sailing, and spent as much time on the water as she could, but the rush could not compete with the gullet. She had loved sailing for its own sake since first Uncle Geryon had taken her out onto the Sunset Sea when she was hardly more than a babe, her and his bastard daughter and Uncle Tyrion and whatever children he had been able to gather. She had dangled over the railings the whole time, during that little pleasure trip, and had talked of nothing but the sea for weeks after her return. Renly had remembered. She wished desperately that she could still trust him as easily now as she had then, when all that had mattered was that he loved her just as she loved him. But they had gone to Dragonstone, she and Renly, and their ship had docked, the Elenii, she knew, a small ship for informal trips, one that Uncle Stannis hated for not being sturdier, for not being safer, for not being stronger for Shipbreaker Bay. Uncle Stannis loved the sea too, Myrcilla was sure of it, but he hated it, as he hated so many things. They had arrived, as usual, already making childish plots to free Shireen of her parents' grim clutches and return her to court with them. Nothing had seemed out of the ordinary, until Myrcilla had seen the flash of white flesh under the gangplank. She had thought it a strange sort of fish, and pointed it out to Renly, but he had heaved her up into his arms and rushed away, hiding her face against his shoulder. Not a fish. Not entirely human, either, not after days and nights and miles in the water, but certainly not a fish. This was nothing like that. Rosamund's fingers dug into Myrcilla's shoulder like steel when smug Sir Hugh of the Vale fell to the Mountain's terrible lance. Death was not unheard of in the lists, even if it was more common in the melee, but this was something else altogether. Often, the Mountain was kept at least a little leashed, saving the monstrousness he was so well feared for to the field, but Myrcilla saw the way his lance tipped up, and she had watched enough jousting over the years to know that laces tended not to splinter like that. She had never seen a lance splinter quite like that. "Goodness," Miri said mildly, belying the sudden paleness of her face. The great golden Baratheon banner across the royal box was spattered with his blood, away to the right, but the bright white Stark banner draped before Lord Stark and Lady Sansa's seats had taken the worst of it, gore streaking up across their beloved direwolf. Lady Sansa's plain little friend was swooning, but Lady Sansa was watching with the same distant interest Myrcilla remembered from seeing her own first dead man. Women were not supposed to see death, of course, and were supposed to avert their gazes, to swoon, but Myrcilla was a Baratheon on one side and a Lannister on the other. Women of such breeding did not swoon. Looking at Lady Sansa, it seemed women of northern stock were not so meek, either. Margaery looked grim, beside Lady Sansa. She was a rabid sportswoman, one of the finest riders of the court, and apparently a genuine asset on the hunt. No doubt she had seen the way the Mountain had behaved dishonorably. Margaery disapproved of poor sportsmanship, and was not generally quiet about it. Now, she was watching across the field, to where the rest of the riders were gathered, to Sir Loras. To her brother, who would like as not end up facing the Mountain. Sir Loras was a truly splendid jouster, elegant in a way even Uncle Jaime was not, and the Mountain's sheer brutality meant he had never lost a match in all the time Myrcilla had been watching him. Sir Hugh's body was dragged away, across the sand and chippings, until someone sourced a stretcher. Myrcilla watched Maester Pycelle's acolytes struggle with the corpse, heavy with death and armor and a lost future, and slipped her arm around Tommen's shoulders. "A waste," her Lord Father grumbled. "And a shame, but always a risk." "Had we a real fight," Joffrey sneered, "I should." "Be quiet, boy," the king said, more subdued than Myrcilla had seen him since they were in Winterfell. Show a little respect, even if you have none. Ursula reached above Tommen's shoulder to touch her father's hand, where it hung limp over the arm of his chair. Your Grace, she called, as quietly as she could. Is there anything you would have me do? Sir Hugh was part of Lord Arryn's household, but as they have departed, I could write to his family and inform them of his misfortune. I could arrange to have his remains sent home, if that is your will. He squeezed her fingers briefly, his many rings clicking. He said. You're a good girl, sweeterling. Please. After today's business is concluded, I'll see if any of John's household yet remains in the city, and I'll send them to you. Good girl. Released and burdened, she gathered Tommen closer against her side. Don't you worry, Your Highness, Rosa whispered, leaning between them so that her words were just for Tommen. If the mountain ever seeks to ride against you, I'll fell him myself. Tommen kissed Rosa's cheek, and she sat back satisfied. Ursula kissed his hair, once more watching Margaery, who was, of course, watching her in return. There was a feast. There was dancing. Ursula was an accomplished dancer, because such things were expected of a princess, but she tired of it quicker than her mother thought appropriate. Still, she would dance with Joff, with Tommen, with her uncles and, on the rare occasion when he could be coaxed to the floor, her lord father. She always danced with her lord grandfather when he was at court, because while he clearly took no pleasure in it and thought the whole business beneath him, Lord Tywine understood better than anyone else. She knew that the appearance of absolute competence was crucial, and no man in Westeros was more competent than Lord Tywine. Truthfully, he was one of her favorite partners. His exactingly perfect step meant she did not have to think about it, and could cast her eye on the other couples on the floor. Uncle Jaime and Uncle Renly were always distracting her with japes both bawdy and silly, and Uncle Stannis had immaculate time but no grace, so dancing with him was like dancing with a pendulum. No Lord Tywine tonight, nor Uncle Stannis, not even Uncle Tyrion to keep her amused between partners. Rosa and Miri were always in high demand, but some were shy of asking the king's daughter to dance, and shyer again of asking the princess who was to wed the Lord Hand's heir to dance, it seemed. She had been left sitting with Tommen since Uncle Renly had returned her to her seat last, spinning away with a grin and a blown kiss to take Margaery's hand. If I may, princess. Lord Stark was smiling very slightly, hand extended to her. She was so surprised that she stared at his hand a moment, so very pale, and then smiled. I should be honored, my lord, she said, and took his hand. Robert doesn't dance much, I suppose, he said quietly, as they moved into the dance. Nor do I, save with my wife, but I do try to dance with my daughters when we have musicians at Winterfell. Oh, Ursula said, unsure what to make of all of this. No, my lord. My father does not take to the floor so often as other men. He is very proud of you, Lord Stark said, dancing with neither Renly and Jaime's style or Lord Tywine or Stannis' precision, but still with a light step and gentle hold. He thinks you and Rob will make a fine match, and I hope the same. You do not think me too Southron, my lord, she asked, cringing a little at the flash of surprise on his face, the moment of severity that creased his brow. Support for the match between Rob and I has not been complete here at court. You forget, princess, that my lady wife is Southron, he said, the severity fading. I think you will not find quite so much opposition to this match as you suppose, not in the north, at least. Ursula doubted that, but hid it behind a smile. How could there not be a disapproving faction in the north, the fathers of daughters who had surely thought themselves secure in an attachment to Winterfell? Rob had brothers, of course, but little Lord Bran was a cripple now, or so everyone had said before they left Winterfell, and that was even if he woke. The other one, little Rickon, was hardly more than a babe. They were not such prizes as the heir to Winterfell himself, even if they were not tainted by infirmity and infancy. Has there been any word of Lord Bran, my lord? She asked, a little ashamed to have not asked sooner. She was to marry into House Stark, to become part of this family, but hardly thought about them at all beyond being tentatively pleased by the positive influence Lord Stark had over the king, and pettily annoyed by Lady Sansa's innocent sweetness. She should have asked sooner, it was a sin on her part that she had not. I am told that he has awoken, Lord Stark said, with the broadest smile Ursula had yet seen on his face. Would her lord father be so overjoyed had Tommen survived disastrous injury, and so willing to show that joy? She could not imagine it. and that he is alert and speaking, even if it seems he may not walk again. Oh. I am so very sorry. He gave her a curious look, and Myrcella quailed slightly. He was a difficult man to read, beyond that stern brow and those rare smiles. I am not, he said simply. Do not think me a fool who sees an easy path ahead of Bran, but there is more to a man's worth than the strength of his legs. He has always been a clever boy, and will grow into a clever man. There are many things he may do, even without his legs. Myrcella thought of Uncle Tyrion, who had both his legs no matter how short they might have been, and his place in the world. She could not see what it was that made Bran Stark so different from Tyrion Lannister. Lord Tywin's children might have ruled the world, had King Aerys not stolen Uncle Jaime, had Myrcella's lady mother not been a woman, had Uncle Tyrion not been a dwarf. Myrcella didn't want to rule the world. She thought that perhaps she might be happy in Winterfell, with a husband to respect her and dance with her and keep her warm. Lord Stark trusted Sansa to run his household, without half a dozen aides. Myrcella had never been trusted with such a thing before, and wondered what it must be like. She would know, perhaps, when Lady Sansa returned to the north to wed her giant and, presumably, Lady Stark came to the city to join Lord Stark in the Tower of the Hand. Then she would have the running of Winterfell, as wife to its heir, and not only responsibility but authority. She was too much Lord Tywin's granddaughter not to wish for at least a little authority. Then I will make it my business to aid him, when I am at Winterfell, she offered. And Lady Stark? She was very kind to me when we visited your home. His face did something strange, but remained unreadable. She wondered if Robb was so troublesome as his father in that regard. It was not a bad thing, necessarily, if he could maintain that stoicism in the face of challenging bannermen, but it would certainly be interesting while they worked to know one another. She will be glad to know you thought so, Princess, he said. She was very pleased with the match between yourself and Robb. The dance came to an end, and Lord Stark led her to her abandoned chair on the dais, below Joffrey's empty seat. Her Lord Father was leaning forward to speak with Lord Dondarrion, roaring laughter right into his face at whatever tall tale he was spinning, and Lord Stark gave him a pained little frown when he belched before turning to greet them. Ah! Ned. She's a good girl, is she not? He bellowed, pulling Lord Stark down into the Queen's chair. Oh, there she was, dancing with Jaime. A fine girl for your fine lad, eh? The princess does you great credit, sire, Lord Stark said, pink-cheeked from the tight grip her Lord Father had on him. My lady and I are honored to have her joining our family. It was nothing Myrcella had not heard 1,000 times before, whenever someone tried to convince her Lord Father to toss aside her hand for some paltry prize. She blushed all the same, because this meant something. She was to marry Lord Stark's son. He would be her good father. Soon, she would be a part of his family, and he was pleased by the addition. She wondered if her father would even notice the loss of her. The end.